let's turn to Revelation 5, and as you're looking over to Revelation 5, you need to remember that this is one scene in the book. We look at Revelation 4 and 5 together because they really is just parts of the same story, Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5. In chapter 4, we are overwhelmed with the glory of God, and we are challenged to set and look at the transcendent God and to be overwhelmed with His glory and with His sovereign control over everything. Now, when we get to chapter 5, as we mentioned last time, we see that the question is, who is going to take the scroll and unlock the seals? Now, what's happening there is that we have the vision of the Father, we have the vision of the Spirit, but in chapter 5, there is this question of what's going to happen now. Now that we are overwhelmed with the glory of the triune God, what's going to happen now? And so, the Lord wants to share this message with us that He is in control of everything going on. Now, this is really important because the people of God here that are reading Revelation for the first time are, of course, experiencing great turmoil. They are being persecuted socially and somewhat physically, and this persecution will intensify. But they want to know that God is in control, that God is still in charge, and God can still take care of them. That's what Revelation 5 is all about, that God is still in control. God is still taking care of you. And this is pictured for us by the scroll of destiny. Okay? This is what it was called. Now, whenever I took a class on Revelation back around the turn of the century, the turn of the millennium, I guess. But I want us to understand this scroll as the scroll of destiny, because this scroll that is about to be unlocked is a scroll that presents everything from the victorious resurrection of Jesus up until His return. This is the scroll of destiny, okay? That everything is in Jesus' hands. He is in control. He is the one that unleashes the 7 seals. He is the one that, despite our perspective, everything seems like it's crazy. From His perspective, God's still in control. This is unleashing the 7 seals that can be quite scary. They're very mysterious as you read through it. But the main message that we need to gain is that God is in control. That's what the rest of the book of Revelation is about. That God is in control. Now, as we have here the 7 seals, I want to remind you of how the rest of the book of Revelation is going to unfold. Because Revelation 4 and 5 sets us up for the rest of the book. We have here the 7 seals that begin to be opened in chapter 5. But then the 7 seals are followed by 2 other series of 7. We have the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and then the 7 bowls of God's wrath. Each one of these series of 7 tells you the same thing. Okay? It's not like you're playing a video game and you have to get past the seals, and then you have to get past the trumpets, and then you have to get past the bowls. Instead, you have these 3 cycles, the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls, and they tell you the same thing 3 times. Y'all with me? The same story 3 times. Okay? It's like you watched one episode of the Andy Griffith Show, once from Andy's perspective, once from Barney's perspective, and then once from Opie's perspective. Same show, though. All right? So what we're going to be looking at for the rest of Revelation is the same thing 3 times. 7 seals, trumpets, and bowls. Okay? And even in that, we'll see that there are a lot of similarities. We have the first 4 seals are representative of God pouring out action on earth. Well, what happens with the first 4 trumpets and the first 4 bowls? The same thing. Right? This is the same thing 3 times. Y'all good? Now that seems weird, doesn't it? Because as you're reading Revelation, those of us here raised here in the United States, a Western mindset, we read Revelation and we say, all right, we got through the 7 seals. What happens next? Well, now we got 7 trumpets to deal with. And then we got 7 bowls. Don't read it that way. That's not the way it was intended. I know it's tempting to, but that's not the way that it is intended. Instead, you've got the same story 3 times. What's the main message each time? God is in control. If you got that, you got the rest of Revelation. The most of it. You don't have to worry about the details so much now. This makes Revelation a lot more accessible to you. Okay? This is a lot more accessible to you now because you're not fretting over the details. You're not trying to figure out specific things in history that pertain to each one of the 7 seals and then each one of the 7 bowls and each one of the 7 trumpets. Instead, you have this cycle, this same story 3 times, and the main message is that God is in control. Okay? So, let's camp out here in chapter 5 for a moment. Chapter 4 ends in worship, and chapter 5 really is dominated with expressions of worship as well. We see in chapter 5, beginning in verse 1, John says, "Then I saw." You'll see chapter 5 is outlined by 4 "and I saw" statements. But here in verse 1, we run into the first one, and he says, "Then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a scroll written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals." Now, already let me remind you again, God is not literally sitting on a throne. He doesn't have a literal body to sit with. He doesn't literally have a right hand. These are all images. They're all symbols telling you something else. So we see the one who is in control. We see the sovereign God. And He has this scroll. Now the Greek word there is biblion, from which we get book or Bible. The idea of a codex, right? You know what a codex is? It's pretty much like a book. It's not exactly the same thing. There are some technical differences there, but it's a book. But you have here either a book or a scroll. There's some debate on whether or not it's a scroll, right, or a book. But it's probably here represented as a scroll. It's probably a scroll, even though it's called a biblion or a book, because of the way that it is described. We first of all acknowledge that having a scroll with 7 seals was a pretty common thing in the ancient world. Whenever you would have a serious contract, okay, if you have a serious contract, it would often be a scroll sealed with, guess how many seals? Guess. 7, you're right. So you would have this scroll sealed with 7 seals, and on the cover you would have a brief description of what this contract was all about. And on the scroll itself, written on the inside and the outside, you would have exactly the stipulations of this contract, what was going to happen in the future. And so it seems that we have a pretty common image, an image that would have been common in the ancient world anyway, of a contract of what was to be done. But here God is pictured holding this scroll with 7 seals, this contract for the future. This is what is going to happen. This is the way God is saying, I am saying to you, this is your future. This is the future I'm giving you. These are the obligations I'm giving you. This is what your story's going to be. This is the scroll with 7 seals, or the scroll of destiny. Notice that it is here held in the hand of God. Now, if we'll go back to Ezekiel, we see that God Himself holds a similar scroll, but there it is God who opens the scroll. I think we really and truly have the same thing here in Revelation 5. Because who is it that comes and takes the scroll? It is no creature, but instead it is the Son of God, the one who shares the divine nature, who is able, He is worthy to take the scroll from the Father and then to unleash this contract, unleash this divine contract of world history, or history of the saved people, up until the judgment day. So let's go back here to verse 2. He says, I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the scroll and to break its seals? And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. So God's contract for the future, no one is able to take it, and no one is able to open it. No one in heaven. This is going to refer to the angelic host, the seraphim, the cherubim, the other angels, the 4 living creatures that are there, and whoever else is there. They are unworthy because they are creatures. They cannot take the scroll and they cannot open it. And then John goes on to say that there's no one in heaven, but no one on earth either. There is no one that is a human who is able to take the scroll. No one has done well enough. Not Moses, not Joshua, not Abraham. They are unworthy to take the scroll. They can't unleash this divine contract. But then he says there's no one under the earth. Now this might sound a bit peculiar, but the phrase under the earth is just a way that the Jewish people described those who had already died. This is where you go, isn't it? When you die, typically, the Jewish people would bury you, just as we typically bury people. Well, where do you bury them? Under the earth, okay? So this was a description of where souls go when they die. Those who are under the earth are those who are already dead, and there are no one in the realm of the dead who is able to take the scroll from God, and there's no one who is able to open the scroll or to set these things in motion. In verse 4, John says, I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. John is weeping because he wants to know what's going on. He wants to know what the future is. He wants to know what is about to happen. But there's no one worthy to take the scroll. There's no one that can take the scroll and open it. So none of these things are going to happen, or at least John's not going to be aware of what's happening. This divine contract will remain hidden unless someone is there who is worthy to take the scroll and open it. But then one of the elders in verse 5 said, Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that He can open the scroll and its 7 seals. Now here we see Jesus described both according to His divine nature and His human nature in chapter 5. Both of these things are huge for Revelation 5. That Jesus is true God and true man. We see the true deity of Christ in that He is the one who is worthy. He is not a creature that's in heaven. He's not a creature that's on the earth. He's not a creature that's under the earth. Instead, He is true God. And He is worthy then to take the scroll. But secondly, we also see this in that Jesus in Revelation 5 receives worship. Who is worthy to receive worship? Only God. But because the Son of God shares in the same nature as the Father, Son, and Spirit share the same divine essence, then Jesus is worthy of receiving worship. And this is what we see as far as the space is concerned, dominating Revelation 5. That Jesus Himself is worshipped. But that is not the emphasis here. we see that the Lamb, the root of the tribe of David, is able to take the scroll and open it specifically because he has conquered. Now, how is it that he conquered? This is talking about his perfect life, his perfect death, and his resurrection and ascension. This is how he has conquered what? He's conquered Satan. He has conquered sin. He has conquered the world. He has overcome, and now he is able to unleash this new contract. Right? This new contract that God is giving over. You'll see a lot of debate. If you picked up the commentary, you'll see that there are 5 or 6 different options for what this scroll might represent. But if you'll look at it the way that I've described, you'll see that each one of those fits pretty nicely into this overarching theme. And so it could be that this could be described as a vision, in part at least, as the New Testament era. Because the one who is true God and also true human at the incarnation is now the one who is worthy to set in motion this divine contract for humans, because he is both God and man. But let's go back a little bit into verse 5 and look at a little bit more specifics of how Jesus is described a little bit. Okay? All right, I need to slow down a minute. So I need to stop and answer some questions. Or just, tell you I don't know either and go on. What thoughts do you have? Probably the biggest thing that's got your brain sort of whirling, right, is the idea that the seals, trumpets, and bowls all talk about the same thing. Right? Maybe it would be helpful to look at Genesis 1 and 2. In Genesis 1 and 2, you have the story of creation given to you how many times? Twice. Right? So you've got, the generations of the heavens and the earth, and then you have the generations of Adam, specifically. Now, it's not 2 different creation stories. This is a common thing that some liberal scholars try to say. Well, there's 2 different creation stories. Moses didn't know which one was right, so he just threw them both in there. But this is pretty typical of Jewish writing, that they will tell one story multiple different ways. In Genesis 1 and 2, you have the creation story told 2 different ways. Here in Revelation, you have the same story of Christian history told 3 different ways. So it's pretty typical.
It doesn't just show the strength. I think it emphasizes again the strength of what the Scriptures are teaching us.
Okay.
About, Proverbs is, I find, a lot of things in the Old Testament very repetitive.
Yeah.
In the same verse, it'll say something, and then point.
Yeah.
You hate your father, and then if you do something with your mother, it does that a lot.
Yeah.
I think it just shows it's emphasizing, it shows strength,
Okay.
importance of the Scripture.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. Well, let's go on here to Revelation 5 and verse 4. Jesus is here described as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Now, this is probably a reference back to Genesis 49. You remember as the 12 sons of Jacob are receiving their blessings. If you'll turn back to Genesis 49, you'll see Judah especially here in Genesis 49 in verse 9, that Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? In verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, or until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of all the peoples. So there we see this prophecy of Judah being the one who produces the Savior, the one that everyone's going to serve. And there is a good bit of Jewish reflection in the commentaries on the ancient Jewish commentaries on this verse and how this is talking about the Messiah. But when we get over to Revelation 5, Jesus is not presented, as we see here in verse 9 of Genesis 49, as a lion's cub. Instead, he is the lion. He is the mature one. He is presented there as the fierce one. Not the cub, but the grown-up lion that you have to deal with. I believe there are 7 or 8 different times in the Old Testament when God Himself is described as a lion. Now, why would God be described as a lion? What do you think of when you think of a lion? King, majesty, fierceness, power. Don't mess with that lion. That's what I think of. Have you seen these folks, a lot of them in India, that have pet lions? That's crazy. I don't know what in the world they're thinking. But y'all need to Google that sometime. It's really impressive. They're part lion, part tiger. Things are like 6 feet tall, and apparently there's not a problem with it. Yeah. I mean, they walk them down the street like you'd walk a dog. But I got off track. I'm sorry. But whenever we look here at God being described as a lion in the Old Testament, He is presented to the people as their warrior king. Their warrior king. So, as we see the people suffering in Rome, wherever they are, we see that they want to have a warrior king that's going to protect them. So Jesus is the fulfillment of this prophecy in Genesis 49, but He is also the warrior God, the warrior king that's going to take care of them and protect them, just as we see several times in the Old Testament. So He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He is also here the root of David. If you'll flip back to Isaiah chapter 11, we see this prophecy being quite important for the whole chapter, really. Isaiah 11, verse 1, there shall come forth a shoot or a root from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. Going on to verse 10, and in that day the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him all the nations shall inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. In verse 12, he will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The jealousy of Ephraim shall depart, and those who harass Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not be jealous of Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim, but they will swoop down on the shoulder of the Philistines in the west, and together they shall plunder the people of the east. What's the message there? There's this Davidic king that's coming, and God, through this Davidic king, or in conjunction with this Davidic king, is going to do away with your enemies. Why is that important for the people reading Revelation? It looks like the enemies are winning. It looks like Rome is about to take over. It looks like the Jews who have been persecuting the church are about to put an end to the church. But not so, God says. He is the root of David. He is the Lion of Judah. He is your protector. He is the one who is with you, and He's the one that will take care of you. So, in verse 5, we have this picture of Jesus. And in verse 6, we see that He finally comes to take the scroll. So the Bible says, between the throne and the four living creatures and among the elders. Now, how's that possible? To be all those places? Because He is both God and human. He has two natures, so He is able to stand there before the throne. He's able to approach the throne, and He is also to be among the elders. He is our perfect representative, isn't He? So between the throne and the four living creatures and among the elders, I saw, look at the way Jesus is pictured here, a lamb standing, as though it had been slain. How is the slain lamb standing? This has to be a resurrected lamb, doesn't it? And so, we have to go in our minds back to the Passover as all of those thousands of Passover lambs would be slaughtered in Jerusalem, so too was Jesus slaughtered. But now He is the Lamb who is standing, the slaughtered Lamb who is standing. How so? Because He's been resurrected. The word for resurrection is anastasis, and the word for standing here is stasis. He is the slaughtered Lamb who stands. He's still alive. He is standing as though it had been slain. Look at the way He's described. 7 horns, this is power. 7 eyes, this is omniscience. And the 7 eyes are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. If you'll remember, Jesus, even in the Gospel of John, is pictured as sending out another comforter, another helper, the Holy Spirit. And I think this is what we have here in Revelation 5. That He is omniscient, He's all-powerful as well. And in showing this, He has performed His incarnate work, and now He has sent the Spirit, along with the Father, He has sent the Spirit into the world to be this other comforter, to be at work now. So the 7 horns and the 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent out into all the earth. In verse 7, He went and took the scroll from the right hand of Him who is seated on the throne. We see here that Jesus must be divine in that He goes up to the throne of God and takes the scroll. Only God is going to walk up to God. But this is what the Son of God does. He walks up to God and He takes the scroll from the right hand of Him who is seated on the throne. And when He had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song. They worshiped. They worship Him. Now again, we have physical imagery that is given to us to present something spiritual. So the harps and then the harps and the golden bowls full of incense. The Bible tells us what these things are, doesn't it? What are they? These are the prayers of the saints, right? Now, this is not literally true. Your prayers are not literally kept in bowls in heaven, are they? Right? I mean, that you understand that that is not literally true. But you can see the picture. You can see what's being communicated. That the prayers of God's people are ascending up before the throne. And who is it that is receiving these prayers? Who is it that is receiving this worship? Who is it that is receiving this admiration and adoration? It is the Son. Why? Because He is true God, He is true human, and He has taken the scroll so that His history, His story, His covenant, His contract can now be released. So, we would not want to say here that we should have instrumental music in the church because we see the 7 harps in heaven. We would just as soon put our prayers in bowls as we would assume that we should have instruments in the church. Neither of those things are literally true. They are giving us a message of something else. The message is an image of worship. So let's go on to verse 9. They sang a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and open its seals. For you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language, people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth." Or you could read, "They shall continue to reign on the earth because they have already been made a kingdom and priest." Right? They are in this royal priesthood. Notice that the praise is directed because of Jesus' work, what He has done. He's worthy to take the scroll and open its seals. He is the one who is slain. He is the one who has ransomed the people. He is the one then that should be worshipped by every tribe, language, people, and nation because He has made them a people for this purpose, to worship Him. This royal priesthood, as we can see the imagery back in Leviticus, but this royal priesthood of the church exist for the adoration of Jesus. They are these royal priests, a kingdom of priests that are there for His service. And they reign on the earth currently, not in the future apart from now, but they are currently reigning just as they are currently a kingdom of priests. Now, we've already seen this back in chapter 1 and verse 9 where John says, I am your partner both in the tribulation and in the kingdom. He's not looking forward to a future kingdom. He says, this is what my reality is now. I am a royal priest. So premillennialism has no foothold here. Instead, he's saying they are now a royal priesthood. They are now serving in worship to the King of Kings because this is what He has done for them and this is who He has made them to be. He looks again in verse 11, and He heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders the voice of many angels numbering myriads and myriads and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, as they are ascribing worship to the Son specifically, worthy is the Lamb who is slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. In other words, everything that we have, He is worthy to receive it. And I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them. This is everything that's been made. As all creation here is pictured as not only the theater of God's glory, but those who are the participants in glorifying God. All creation shouts out, to Him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever. We see this worship dominating chapter 5. Now this is important for us because what do you expect with people that are suffering? Not usually worship. But what do you see pictured for us here? The suffering people are worshiping. This is an example that we see over and over in the book of Acts. You look at the early Christians as they are being persecuted for their faith and for the preaching of their faith. What do? They rejoiced that they were counted worthy to suffer for the name. Isn't that remarkable? They don't give up. They don't say, woe is me. But instead they rejoice because God saw fit to allow them to suffer on His behalf. What do we see pictured in heaven? We see here primarily the angelic host worshiping the Son because of who He is and what He has done. One of the neat things that I hope you'll do, we won't be able to do it in a class setting like this, but to read through Revelation in one sitting and just note all of the different expressions of worship that are given. All the different times that we see worship given to God in Revelation. You'll see phrases like here in Revelation 5, whole chapters that are dominated with worship. You'll also run into 7 Beatitudes in Revelation. These are wonderful ways of pointing us back to what our reality is supposed to look like as God's people. But here we have everything in earth and heaven praising Jesus. To Him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb, the resurrected Lamb, be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. And the 4 living creatures said, Amen. And the elders fell down and worshiped. All right. Chapter 5 is really important. I think it's sort of easy once you understand a little bit of what's going on. But I want you again to see chapters 4 and 5 as the foundation for the rest of the book. Everything else is built off of these 2 chapters, or this one scene. Okay? Can we start talking about these things as a scene? You'll often see that it takes 2 chapters to have one scene. So we have this particular scene in heaven, and what's the message? God is on the throne. The Spirit is lighting the way, but the Son has taken the scroll. He's in charge of this contract. He is unleashing this contract, and we are in His care. Everything might seem crazy, but heaven's still worshiping, and that's what we need to do as well. Okay? All right, any questions or thoughts?
Weren't those people those days were probably who this message was going to be given to were well aware of this type of symbolism? I'm sure that they knew this was something that they dealt with, just like parables, and
Yeah.
they were well aware of this symbolism.
Yeah, if you...
We have symbolism all the time. We just
Yeah.
don't think about it.
If you'll remember, when we were in the introductory lessons, we talked about apocalyptic literature. This is apocalyptic literature, and it's all about the symbols, right? Well, it's really not all about the symbols. It's about the message behind the symbols. Yeah. All right? Anything else? All right. We're going to be dismissed a little bit early. Y'all didn't know I could do that, did you?